intent of having the right technology with the resources available in the country and having the know-how components which are industry grade to be compliant with medical grade and make them work. A 1 hour sit down with these people is a ton of knowledge.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. Hope you guys are doing great and keeping safe. And today we'll be talking to Dr. Javed. He's an engineer by passion and also a very positive human being. Sir is also, even after the podcast ended, we spoke a lot about, different ideas, different approaches, and, how to actually go about ventures that we've been planning here at Medical More. Make sure you guys subscribe and hit the like button, and hope you guys like this podcast. So welcome on Medical More podcast, Dr. Javed. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out the time and being and talking here with us on this podcast today. How are you doing, sir?
Thank you, Gagan, for the invitation. And I'm doing good. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be talking to young geniuses and talented folks who are doing some wonderful work. It's a pleasure on my side.
Thank you, sir. So just to get started, you are an engineer who has about 12 years plus experience with analog IC designs. And also you've been working on various different facets of projects. Prana is one of those things. And, we'll talk a lot about it later on the podcast. But coming back, you also mentored about 4,000 students, which is very motivational. Uh, so I have a small perspective to ask you, as a very curious person. So how did this affair around going towards the analog IC designs begin so for you? Because I asked this only because you also mentor people at Udemy with analog designs. You also teach that there. So I just want to know, how did this facet of subject love start for you?
Interesting question. Believe me, it was not my first subject of
Okay.
choice. The first
Oh.
subject of choice was signal processing when I was doing
Okay.
my engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So I started off with analog signal processing, then digital signal processing, and in my seventh semester, when I reached a place where I found out what is the limit for digital signal processing, they said the semiconductor is the limit. And that
Oh.
changed
Okay.
direction for me, saying, okay, what in semiconductor is changing? Is this the processor or what is it? Then it came across that the analog design is could be a potential bottleneck, is what I found out. So what I did
Mm-hmm.
was in my seventh and eighth semester, though I did a project on OFTM and the signaling in OFTM, I got a very good job in Bharat Electronics to work on analog circuit design, and I did see translation of semiconductor digital signal processing happening on analog design. That was the praise, and the the nice flame or ignition happened because I was able to work on military designs. I was able to work on
Oh.
space grade designs. So those gave unique challenges, and those unique challenges instilled a spark. Said, I will continue my career to be an analog.
Most of the times, I think like majority of the people, through college or what your childhood dreams are, you would dream that, okay, this would be your profession. But then you go to college, things change. And when you actually are out there, it changes again. It becomes very differential. It's not very linear throughout, I guess. But so, if you had to suggest two beginner books,
Mhm,
okay, for somebody to get into analog design,
mhm.
uh, what would those two be, sir?
Uh, those are wonderful textbooks, and if you give me the time, I can quickly grab them for you. So you see, I always have this book within hand's reach. It's a book called
Wow. Okay.
Integrated Electronics, and it is by Jacob Milman and Christos Halkias. We call it as Milman and Halkias books. This is something
Okay.
any analog design engineer should never step out with. And it's an amazing book
Oh.
to be had. Uh, and that was the first book which initiated. And the second book is written by a very famous author. Both is called Jacob Baker, whose textbook right now is very commonly used in all textbooks as for analog circuit design. And as you go into higher studies, there is a book by a professor from University of California at Los Angeles called Behzad Razavi. So he teaches a book called Microelectronics and RF Microelectronics and CMOS Circuit Design. So these are three books he writes and he wrote, and there's a second revision which has now come out. So these are the books I personally feel are great to have, not only as a beginner, but even as a seasoned designer. This is great set of books to have very close to you.
Oh, why I asked you this was because we have a lot of listeners of this podcast who are actually getting into designing of medical devices.
Mm-hmm.
So, probably that would come hand in hand. We were talking about Project Prana beforehand. Just to give the listeners a little bit of context, Project Prana means, in Sanskrit, it means breathe, and in Kannada, it means life. So, what Project Prana is, it's a low cost ventilator which was designed and prototyped by Dr. Javed and his team at IISc Bangalore. The most fascinating part of this project, why I say that, is because even in spite of national lockdown, where the whole domestic supply chain was at a standstill point, they actually put their the real engineering pioneering skills out and actually designed and prototyped the whole project just with the things that were available at the local markets or at their reach. So but more about that, sir. I want to know on a very personal level, how was that project for you? Okay, because you were involved in that project, and also what were those few barriers that you had to overcome? Like, I know that when you have to build something, you are very fixated on, okay, we need XYZ components to build this project. But since there was not much of supply available, what were those few challenges that you guys faced?
Wonderful, thank you. But there are some things I need to have. So a clear disclaimer. So
Okay.
the disclaimer is, I was not the lead or anyway. The lead was
Okay.
actually my PhD advisor, Dr. Gaurav Banerjee. He and some of the senior faculty members of IAC, specifically from the departments of DESC, where Professor T.V. Prabhakar, Professor Jamadagni, and Professor Gaurav Banerjee from ECE, and we had Professor Duvuri Subramaniam from the Aerospace Department. So these were the core team members. I came in as a former student of Professor Gaurav, and who expressed interest to work and support. So they were the main core executing team. I was probably one of the support staff, you could say. But I contributed in the marketing of the project as the website is, and I mostly worked on the biomedical design standards aspect with Professor Manish Arora from Department of CPDM. So the reason I'm mentioning these names, it is not just one small person or one group of people doing. In an institute like
It's a
IASC,
collective.
it's a collective effort spanning across multiple departments with experts from multiple areas coming in and contributing to the country. So I think that was the intent of having the right technology with the resources available in the country and having the know-how. And one of the main challenges you asked, first of all, was having personnel at ground at IAC while doing the research work. And IAC was confident to give permission to a lot of people. Second was getting these components, which are industry grade, to be compliant with medical grade and make them work. So that was one of the challenges for the entire team.
Right, sir. You have been working under many frameworks, organizational frameworks. What I mean is, as somebody who has been pioneering for these many years at organizations such as Intel,
Mhm.
which you currently hold the position of lead technicals, um, I just want to know if there is a startup, okay, a
Mhm.
group of people putting up a company, especially in the medical and healthcare devices in that sort of a field.
Right.
What would you suggest that few things to avoid or not waste too much of time on those two or three components which are probably important but it does not really need much attention as how much the smaller ones would need in terms of weightage.
Okay. Uh, there are a few things specifically in the area of biomedical design or biomedical devices. There are two things. One, the moment there is biomedical or medical, it needs to be compliant with certain rules. These are a lot of things, engineering or development, we don't consider these right in the beginning. So this is something you should focus on. The best way to focus on to talk some of the people who have already built these things, right? A 1 hour sit down with these people is a ton of knowledge. So always do that. What not to do is do not miss paying attention to what the market is. If there is an existing market, do you go with the competition or do you avoid going into the same market? That is one thing you should do. Third thing is you should understand that biomedical devices need a lot more investment, a lot more testing right in the beginning before you even launch it, even before you do your first prototype, which goes into that. The moment you understand that, then you go looking for the optimal solution. And before you even start for looking for a solution, see if there is an actual need for such a product here. And if there is a need, who are the people who are going to pay for that product? These are the two things that you should always understand. It might be a great product, but you might not find anybody willing to pay for it. So all your effort that you've done and you end up having nobody pay for it is a big loss. So well, that is one thing that I've heard the hard way. Looking at some of my fellow IACNs who are working in biomedical designs. So I've learned from them by saying, first identify the people who are going to pay for your innovation and it is going to help them. Only then start working on the development of it.
So, is there any such startups that you are very fascinated about in today's day and age, that you feel like, okay, this is something that's a little ahead of time, or this is something that's increased efficiency of one process to a very extreme level?
I will be a little biased here because two of my friends are
Okay.
doing two different startups. First is a wonderful work being done at CPTM. It's called Xfinito Biodesign. It's an amazing startup where they're looking at biomedicine and biodesign activities. Then there is Autoyos, where another friend of mine is doing that. There are two good companies who are working on it, and they are being mentored by some amazing people. What gives me a heads up is a very old startup called Strand Biolife Sciences. And currently, you should be able to see new designs where you can artificially design a liver, artificially design a kidney, and
Oh.
artificially design a heart. So that would be my ultimate goals, that if you're working, use these as products which can be go back into the human body again and be compatible. So these are the targeted bodies. Now there is one step before that I would like to do. Create a model using artificial intelligence or machine learning. Build a thorough model such that you can give all the inputs that you would need to create an actual liver, kidney, and heart, so that that model can help reduce the amount of tests that you would do to qualify your product into a realistic one. So that machine learning model is kind of something which I really love to see, and it is coming out. There are so many companies in Bangalore who are working on it. For example, there is Renal Healthcare, which works about the kidney, incubated at ISC.
Yeah.
Strand Life Sciences is a very well known company which is working on something similar. So these models are something amazing, and I would really love to see these. So I am very biased with companies centered around IAC, seeing such amazing technological ideas going into the medical market to help the generation coming forward and reduce the suffering of people who have diseases with regards to these organs in human body.
That makes that's actually really cool, sir. In the without taking any names out, in the past 6 months, there's been few data leaks that been happened at pharmaceuticals.
Mhm.
Most of them were just patient data. More or less, like 95% of them were patient data rather than the company's chronologies. And most of these patients' data which were leaked, they were not even taken consent from the patient for being using their data as research purpose.
Mhm.
So I started to think decentralization of data using blockchain or any hyperledger network is more safer.
Mhm.
But what are your thoughts on this, sir?
Blockchain also can be a good source, but there are two things. One is an ethical issue, another is a technical issue. Technical issue is very easy to solve. You know what happens at data security, what are the things that can happen, where are the issues that can happen, and you can solve it. It is a problem which has a known solution, and there are various other solutions. But now, here, if you look at the ethics portion of it, it is the responsibility of the organization to take appropriate measures that this is not leaked out or it is not brought out. Now, there are two things aspect of it. One, whenever, without taking the names of the patients, if the data is available, it is a monetizable commodity for the person who's holding the data. So if an opportunity comes to monetize the data, looks like people are taking that opportunity. But it has to have enough exclusivity in such that the names and direct information of who it is going to impact is not brought out. That would be the first thing. But not having the consent is again within the purview of ethics, that you should not be doing things. These kind of things are taken very seriously in the medical and the legal fraternity in the West. And in India, I think it is slowly coming in where enforcement is needed. You might still have the regulations for it, but we need to see stricter enforcement of the same laws, and penalties for not adhering to it also need to be harsher to these organizations, because uh, some systems deal with warning, some system deal with penalty, some systems deal with really harsh penalty to ensure that things don't go out of hand. So that's my opinion.
So I'll have to ask you this. So there is a couple of friends of mine at campus, and they have this startup
Mhm.
which they are actually working on compressing the size of the devices, the medical
Mm,
devices. Okay, majorly working on IC design, most of the circuiting.
mm,
That's what they're mainly focusing. Since to just shrink the size and get it more compact, make it more weightless, make it more affordable.
mhm.
Not very affordable, but yeah, okay, drop the cost down by 10-15% of margin.
Okay.
So uh, what would, and they're still at a very they're at a phase where they do find a lot of complication when it comes to IC
Mm,
designs. If you had to guide them through this,
mhm,
okay, without just laying out a very vague outline of how they could approach this in a more effective and an efficient
mm.
way, what would that be? Or not just for them, like for any startup or any company that is actually doing dealing with the medical device
Mm.
designs and electronics.
Uh, Appreciating the effort that they're doing at miniaturizations, but I would ask them if they could keep the cost to 1/10, not just by reducing it
Okay.
15%. So try to reduce it by 90%, because once electronics comes in, you will have to go at various levels of getting compliance for that, medical grade working, make it having multiple redundancy for it. So you need to ensure that all these points are taken care of. So for that, you need to reduce the cost drastically. People would say that when you mass manufacture it, you can reduce the cost. But my take on it is, even when you're doing small volume, say 100 numbers, 50 numbers, see that your cost is reduced by 90%, not just when you manufacture. Another aspect I would definitely ask is, if you are doing an integrated circuit, uh, my suggestion would be, first get the right proof of concept by building it on a PCB using readily available off-the-shelf components, because that way you already know how to predict the cost. And after that, after you are able to prove and miniaturize that to a smaller level, then go as a next step to building something called an application specific integrated circuit, or ASIC. Go ahead with doing that. I say that because a big portion of my PhD was actually to build a assay where it was a 3x3 array of a diagnostic device for a lab on a chip application. And when you build an ASIC at this case, the end product might be good, but the process of getting the end product is expensive. You need to pay for silicon packaging, you need to pay for silicon manufacturing, getting the customs and imports taken care of. That's an expensive process. So that is my feedback on that.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to make this podcast mainstreaming on Project Prana
Mm-hmm.
and also on talking about the entrepreneurial startups that are coming out
Mm-hmm.
on the healthcare devices, because I think there's a lot of inefficiency there,
Okay.
which can be reduced through these startups.
Yeah.
I think that is something that we've realized through COVID,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that our results are out very quick.
Right.
It just makes life more convenient in that way.
So
So thank you so much, sir. This was great talking to you on this.
thank you.
Thank you very much for coming, sir. Really appreciate it, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting, and it's always a pleasure to speak to people doing wonderful initiatives. And more power to you, more power to the medical more community, and see that your
Thank
podcasts
you, sir.
read wide. And thank you so much once again.